when you lose 2 games in a row, you're trying to figure out what's going on. And a lot of people, like the analysts and the fans, are going to point the finger and try to find the blame as a team. You say, look, we all have to come together. We have to do better and figure this thing out. That's exactly what the Hawks are doing. Me and my guy, Bryan Walters, are going to try to figure this thing out. He's in for Stacy today. What is wrong with this defense? Are we concerned about the defense? What's your level of concern? And initially, without even looking at numbers, the first thing I thought to myself was, all right, the run defense must be pretty bad right now. 175 yesterday you gave up against, or let the Giants game. A couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, you let 185 happen against New England. And then, I started looking at the stats, and the stats say that they are just really average against the run. They're really average. I'm talking about rushing first downs, rush yards per game, give it up, or rush yards per attempt, give it up. They're average. They're sitting around anywhere between 15 and 18 when you look at some of these major stats. So yesterday, when you go up against a team who has no Malik Neighbors, Singletary's not in there, and you allow them to rush for 174, and then Darius Slayton steps up and he goes for 122, you start to scratch your head and say, what exactly is going on with this defense? What are your first impressions?
Yeah, first impressions, I felt that the Giants were never playing behind the sticks. You take the very first play or the very first sack on the first drive of the Giants when Daniel Jones fell over. There was no pressure on him. He just fell, kind of kicked it, lost the ball. And at that point, I was like, okay, this is going to be fun playing against Daniel Jones. Hopefully he keeps doing this all game. But that was their biggest loss of the game. That was the furthest they pushed him back. I think there was a 10-yard sack that was given to him. And then they had a 2-yard sack. And then they had a sack for 0 yards. So they only drove the Giants backwards on 2 plays. The Giants only had 2 penalties as well. So they played a clean game. Mm-hmm. So they were not pushing themselves backwards. The Seahawks weren't pushing them backwards. So the Giants were constantly pushing forward and getting in third and manageables and maybe breaking in 5-6 yard runs on first down. There was no penetration in the backfield. They weren't. Big Ray talked about it yesterday a little bit, how like up front, the goal is to almost just win even 6 inches. If you can push your guy back 6 inches, mm-hmm. you win that battle because you're making them play that much further back than they want to. So if you're a defensive lineman, you can get the offensive line back on his heels, 6 inches to a yard. You're a disruptor. You're making the running back have to make a cut he doesn't want to make yet, instead of to hit the hole at full speed or being able to survey where the hole is going to open up quicker. And so, but when you allow the offensive line, because there's a couple times you saw some double teams really pushing our big men back. They were 3-4 yards back into the linebackers, and that makes it tough on the linebackers to fill the gaps that they're supposed to fill. Right. When Jerome Baker's trying to weave in and out of his linemen getting pushed back at him, that's just a sign of disaster on the defensive side of the ball. So it's just. There's got to find a way to get a push, get pressure, to disrupt the teams when things are starting to develop, because that's what it's all about. It's about disrupting the quarterback and making them make impromptu decisions that you don't want to make. I mean, you can play in rhythm. Football's an easy game. Even Daniel Jones can go off for 257 yards because he was in rhythm, and he has a good arm. We know that. The Giants like him because of the potential in his arm and what he can do, but it's his decision making when you get him flustered and under pressure that makes all the criticism of him, and that's what we didn't do to him.
360 says, Bump, just a few tweaks here and there, and they're 5-0. No time to panic. I don't think anyone's panicking, right? You and I have played in the league, and you're not going to go undefeated. You're going to lose to minimum 4 to 6 games. Typically, an NFL team loses. But when you drop 2 in a row, you have to search for answers. I think against the Detroit Lions, better offensive line, you're missing a whole bunch of guys on the defense. I looked at the film last night when it came to this defense, and I thought the defensive line did a pretty good job keeping the linebackers clean, Dotson and Jerome Baker. There were times where the Giants are combo getting to those linebackers and just controlling them. That's going to happen in a football game. But there were times where the linebackers were clean, but they weren't flying downhill with that same intensity that we saw in that first and second game. Guys aren't fresh anymore. Understand that, right? You're in week 5 of a football season. You're going to be banged up. But it seemed like the level of intensity has dropped a little bit from that second level, those linebackers. That's going to happen throughout the course of a season. But for the first time, I looked at the linebackers and said, all right, they might be a little undersized, because in between breaks, I'm looking at film of the 49ers, and I'm looking at Fred Warner, and no one's moving him. And granted, he's the best LB in the game. It's hard to compare these guys to him, but nobody's moving him. So I think the level of intensity, man, like the way we were taking on these linemen with the inside shoulder, shedding the block, getting down and making these tackles, it doesn't seem as efficient right now when I look at the film.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of the model that McDonald's going for. He needs those big guys to clear things up, easily, where the linebackers are free. They shouldn't. I don't think he wants these linebackers to have to take on a 330-pound guard.
They're gonna have to, though.
They're gonna have to
every day.
But we didn't see that earlier in the year. We didn't see that against the Broncos. We didn't see that. Week 2, week 3, we didn't see it. We saw them coming free. We saw Tyrel Dotson hitting these gaps and disrupting plays in the backfield because he was coming free, because these defensive linemen were taking these guys on. They were holding strong, and if 2 defensive linemen can take out 4 offensive linemen, you're in a pretty good spot. If they're not letting them get off these double teams and work their way to the linebackers, you're in a really good spot as a defense. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things. And these guys are now having to take on blocks, and they're also I thought Jerome Baker played a great game. A great game, a good game. I thought he played a good game for coming off of 3 weeks. We haven't seen him, and he was flying around. But there's things you notice that he hadn't been on the field practicing. I think a couple missed tackles, just out of position, a step away from making a big play, and things like that. So I think all this is gonna come together. That's the other thing. Yesterday I was talking about a lot. It's like a game of chess right now in the NFL. Teams are figuring you out. Mm-hmm. Teams have 4 or 5 games of film on you, and now they're throwing their best stuff at you. What they've seen. Hey, here's this team's weaknesses. And now where you go from there is how does McDonald correct these weaknesses? He notices what teams are really successful against you running, and now how does he take that away from teams where it's just this chess match that goes back and forth? And I think that's what the first 6 to 8 weeks of an NFL season are. That's why you see teams who are good maybe not underperform a little bit because they haven't made those adjustments yet. But you really see the cream of the crop rise, second half of the season, and that's because they've kind of figured this out. They know how teams are going to attack them, and they've got the formula. And right now we're learning. We're learning right now, and I think McDonald's going to take all this into consideration. He's going to make the adjustments needed, and hopefully gets it figured out by week 7, week 8.
Yep. Now, when you play the Niners, man, there's going to be some misdirection. They're going to try to confuse you. So you have to be disciplined when you are clean on that second level. Make the play. Easier said than done, right? These guys are out there on the field, but adjustments will be made. I'm looking at the text lines, and people are already starting to abandon ship when it comes to Mike McDonald and the defense. Don't do it. It's early. It's a long season, but you do need to see some improvement. I agree 100%.